My name is Melissa Navarro. I'm 31 years old, and on October 18th, 2025, my parents boycotted my wedding because I refused to move it for my sister's luxury vacation. They didn't come late. They didn't sit in the back quietly. They left 2 empty seats in the front row for everyone to see. Before that day, my father had told me exactly what he planned to do. He looked me in the eye and said, "If you don't change the wedding date, don't expect us to be there. We're going to teach you a lesson." And they did. What they didn't know was that my husband had already found the one thing they never wanted exposed. And at 8:23 that night, in front of everyone they cared about impressing, he stood up at our reception and told the room the truth. That was the moment their reputation cracked open. And once it did, everything underneath it spilled out. It started almost 2 years earlier, in December of 2023, when James proposed to me in a park in Austin under homemade string lights and an old oak tree. It was simple, quiet, and perfect. The next morning I called my parents. My mother cried. My father sounded proud. For a few minutes I let myself believe I mattered to them, in the way my sister always had. A week later, my mother told me something that made me cry all over again. She said my grandparents had left a wedding trust behind. $120,000 for the first grandchild to marry, me. I remember sitting there at their dining table, staring at her, feeling like my grandparents had somehow reached across time to bless my future. My father barely looked up from his phone when he said, "That money is yours. We'll make sure you have a beautiful wedding." I believed them. That was my first mistake. By spring of 2024, James and I found our venue. It was a hill country resort with an overlook pavilion, string lights, room for 200 guests, and the kind of sunset that makes everything look softer than it really is. We booked October 18th, 2025, and put down a non-refundable deposit. My mother texted right away saying the date was perfect. I saved that message without knowing why. My younger sister Claire has spent most of her adult life being treated like a project my parents were proud to fund. She calls herself a lifestyle creator. She posts beaches, boutique hotels, wellness retreats, expensive coffee, and captions about choosing yourself. My parents paid her rent, her car, her trips, and called it supporting her dream. I was the other daughter, the reliable one, the steady one, the one who would be fine. That was the word my father always used for me. Fine. Claire was exciting. Claire had spark. Claire was special. I was just the daughter who didn't need much. By July of 2025, 3 months before the wedding, my mother texted me and said, "Call me about the date." I stepped outside my office and called her in the heat, already uneasy. Her voice was tight. Claire had booked a luxury retreat overseas. It overlapped with my wedding. It was expensive. It was apparently important for her career. Could I move the date? I honestly thought she was joking. I said, "Mom, the venue's booked. The save the dates already went out. The florist is contracted. My dress alterations are underway. Everything is set." She said, "This is about family." What she meant was Claire. I said, "No." 2 days later, my father called and said the same thing with less sugar. He told me I was selfish. He said my wedding could happen any time, but Claire's opportunity was important. When I still refused, he said, "Then we have a problem." A week later, they demanded an in-person meeting. James came with me. My mother sat there acting calm while my father stood by the window like a man negotiating a business deal. Claire joined on speakerphone, half paying attention from another city. Their solution was that I move the wedding to the following year, absorb the chaos, lose money, and smile while doing it. When I said no again, my father's face changed. The performance dropped. The next morning, he texted me that because I had chosen this path, I should not expect their financial support. Then he added the line, "I will never forget. The money your grandparents left was for a wedding that honored family. This doesn't qualify. You'll get nothing from us." I read that text 3 times. Then I showed James and asked the question I had never wanted to ask out loud. "Can they do that?" He didn't answer right away. He just said, "We're going to find out." For weeks, my parents barely spoke to me. I called, I texted, I got silence. Meanwhile, Claire posted nonstop about trip prep, designer luggage, and how some things were just meant to be. My parents liked every post. They ignored every wedding update I shared. Then in September, my mother called and said they would come to the wedding, but they wouldn't be happy about it. She told me they would not participate in photos unless I apologized to Claire. She said this was meant to teach me humility. Humility. That was their favorite word whenever they wanted obedience to sound noble. 8 days before the wedding, the venue coordinator emailed me with the subject line, "Urgent, conflicting instructions." Attached were 3 emails from my mother asking about postponing, rescheduling, and eventually stopping the wedding altogether. In one of them, she wrote, "This wedding should not proceed on this date. I'm asking you, as the mother of the bride, to help us stop this mistake." I felt physically cold reading it. My own mother had tried to interfere with my wedding behind my back. I forwarded everything to James. He called me immediately and said, "Melissa, I need to show you something tonight. This is bigger than you think." That night, he came home with his laptop and sat me down at the kitchen table. Then he told me what he'd been doing while I'd been crying myself to sleep. He'd been digging. James works in finance. He knows how to follow paper trails. And while I had been focused on surviving the emotional fallout, he had been focused on the one thing liars always underestimate: records. He found the trust information first. Then, he found the withdrawal. $80,000 had been taken from the $120,000 wedding trust in July of 2025, just days before my parents demanded I move the wedding date. The recipient was Claire. The memo line called it an advance wedding distribution. Claire was not engaged. I remember staring at the screen, not breathing right, feeling like the room had tilted. Then James opened the trust language from my grandparents' estate. The funds were for the first grandchild upon marriage, to be used for wedding expenses, a first home, or marital establishment as the beneficiary saw fit. Me. Not Claire. Me. My parents were trustees. They were supposed to protect the money. Instead, they had redirected most of it to my sister, then tried to deny it existed for me at all. And James kept going. He found another transfer from my father's personal account in September, $15,500 for Claire's trip extension and excursions. So while they were telling me they had no money for my wedding and calling me selfish for refusing to change the date, they were paying to keep her vacation going. That was the moment something inside me changed. I stopped wanting their love. I started wanting the truth documented. Over the next week, James built a presentation, trust paperwork, bank transfers, my mother's venue emails, my father's texts. Screenshots of Claire's travel posts lined up against the dates and the money. It was clean, precise, impossible to explain away. The night before the wedding, James looked at me and said, "We can still back out. We can just get married and leave this alone." I thought about my grandparents. I thought about that trust fund being twisted into a weapon. I thought about 31 years of being told to be understanding, mature, steady, humble. And I said, "No. We show them." The next day, I got dressed without my mother. My maid of honor zipped me into my gown. I wore my grandmother's pearls. At 2:33 that afternoon, my mother texted, "We'll be there, but don't expect smiles." I turned my phone off. My father refused to walk me down the aisle, so my uncle did. When he came to get me, his eyes were red. He just said, "Ready, kiddo?" When I stepped out, I saw the 2 empty front row seats that had been reserved for my parents. They had arrived, but instead of sitting where parents sit, they had chosen the back row like spectators, waiting for a show they planned to ruin. I walked anyway. I kept my eyes on James. The ceremony began. Everything was beautiful in that painful, almost unreal way weddings can be when your heart is cracked and functioning at the same time. Then, right at the part where the officiant asked if anyone objected, my father stood up. The whole pavilion froze. He said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Melissa, your mother and I are leaving. Think about what you've done to this family. We won't be part of this mistake." Then he walked out with my mother sobbing beside him. The silence after that felt endless. My uncle leaned toward me and whispered, "Keep going, honey." So I did. I got married with my head high and my hands steady, even though part of me felt like I had just been abandoned in public. James looked at me during his vows and promised that no matter who was watching, he would always stand up for me. He meant it. At the reception, those 2 empty chairs stayed at the parents' table where everyone could see them. By 8:15, the toasts began. Best man, maid of honor, laughter, tears. Polite normalcy stretched over a room full of people pretending they weren't waiting to talk about what had happened. Then the DJ announced a special message from the groom. James stood up, took the microphone, and turned on the projection screen that was supposed to show a photo montage. Instead, the title slide came up in white text on black. The price of humility. The room went silent. James started with my grandparents and the trust. He read the language slowly so no one could miss it. Then he showed the transfer, $80,000 to Claire. Gasps moved through the room like a wave. Then he showed her travel posts. Then the second transfer for the vacation extension. Then my mother's emails trying to sabotage the wedding. Then my father's text messages. Then the video clip from the ceremony itself, my father standing up and walking out. No shouting, no dramatics, just documents, dates, amounts, their own words. He ended with our wedding budget and the truth that my parents, despite all their money, had contributed nothing except theft, pressure, and humiliation. Then he said, Melissa didn't learn humility today. She learned who her family really is. And for 5 full seconds, no one moved. Then my aunt stood and started clapping. My uncle stood next. Then more people. Then nearly the entire room was on its feet. Not applauding gossip, applauding truth. After that, the night split open. Some relatives left, others cried. My father's brother cursed him out in absentia. My phone lit up with messages until I turned it face down. And somehow, after all of it, the reception became a real celebration, the kind where the air changes after the truth is finally spoken and everyone can breathe again. The next morning, the story was already spreading. Family posts, screenshots, calls. Then an attorney reached out after seeing what had happened. Within days, James and I were sitting in an estate lawyer's office while he reviewed the trust documents and bank records. After 90 minutes, he looked at me and said, "You have an airtight case." A lawsuit was filed. My parents were served. The local media picked it up. Reviews started hitting my father's dealerships. Relatives who had stayed silent started choosing sides. My uncle gave an interview saying exactly what should have been said long before that wedding day. Pride and favoritism had destroyed my parents' relationship with me. Less than 3 weeks after the wedding, my parents asked to mediate. They settled. I received the full value of what had been stolen, plus damages and legal costs. They also had to sign a written apology admitting they had let favoritism and pride guide their actions and that they had failed me as parents. When I read it, I didn't cry, because by then I understood something that took me years to learn. An apology is not the same thing as repair. Money is not the same thing as love. And family is not the same thing as access. 6 months later, James and I used part of that settlement for the down payment on our first house. I was pregnant. We painted a nursery together and started writing our own will, our own trust, our own rules. Rules built on protection, not control. My parents tried sending a gift once. I returned it. Maybe one day there will be reconciliation. Maybe there won't. But I no longer confuse silence with peace, and I no longer confuse obedience with love. What happened at my wedding hurt more than I can explain. 2 empty seats can say a lot. So can a father standing up in the middle of his daughter's ceremony just to make sure her humiliation is public. But what my parents forgot is that public humiliation works both ways once the truth gets involved. They wanted to teach me a lesson. They did, just not the one they planned. I learned that the family you build will save you when the family you come from tries to break you. I learned that documentation is power. I learned that sometimes the person who looks calm is simply the person who finally has proof. And I learned that love does not ask you to shrink so someone else can stay comfortable. So if your family uses money to control you, guilt to silence you, or loyalty as a weapon, Document everything. Know your rights. Get help. And remember this. Sometimes the moment they think they're humiliating you is the exact moment they lose the right to define you forever.